the votes in the UN yesterday, what President Trump's, his call with Putin recently, and what he said of President Zelensky, it's becoming evident that it's sort of Ukraine and Europe versus the US and Russia in this geopolitical environment. And with that changed dynamic, how do you think Moscow views the prospect of Beijing's involvement in the negotiations? Does it welcome China's engagement as another potential major ally in the effort, or does it see potential pitfalls? How do you think they see it?
Thanks, Ellen. I mean, as you noted, the deck has really been reshuffled in the last few weeks, and we see this very unexpected sort of alignment of the United States and Russia against Ukraine, and Europe with China somewhere in between. Over the past 3 years, the Russians have largely seen China as, an enabling factor when it comes to issues of diplomacy, as just sort of standing back and supporting Russian positions in a broad sense, but also giving China some leeway to present itself a little bit more neutrally when it comes to votes in the UN and some of its diplomacy in the international stage. We had the Chinese-Brazilian peace plan at some point a couple of years ago, and while there were some, I think, feathers that were ruffled in Moscow by, some of the statements that were part of that plan, I think overall from the Kremlin's perspective, it didn't really cross any Russian points of concern to really be putting the Russians in a more challenging position and to really sort of apply pressure on Russia. And so there's been this bit of delicate dance, again, where a lot of the support, as we've been talking about, has been coming in the form of commercial sales, energy, imports to China, and these military technical components. So when it comes to this new alignment and going forward, I mean, this is a really tricky question for Russia. Does Russia really want China to be more involved in this kind of fundamental, arguably the biggest question in European security? And, I think it will be a bit of a mixed bag going forward, where Russia is going to look to China to, back some of its positions and try to avoid the emergence of some kind of China-Europe discussion that excludes Russia. When I was in Beijing in the fall and had the pleasure of talking with Long and some of his colleagues and talking to a variety of Chinese scholars and officials, there was some interest at that point, and that was before our election, of some Chinese high-level outreach to Europe and some sort of, whether it's a contact group or a format to discuss sort of various scenarios to end the war. What was interesting is that, it was kind of a question of whether Russia and Ukraine would be part of that dialogue or if it would be more of a China, Europe, United States discussion among the non-direct parties, and then coming to the direct parties with some sort of conception of what the world kind of thinks, the settlement should look like. I noticed that those discussions have sort of gone by the wayside, and my sense was that the Russians would have been a bit uncomfortable with the idea of, Chinese and European and maybe American officials sitting together and talking about the war without Russia there. So again, I think it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag and a tricky balancing act from Russia's perspective.